Number 10. Crashed car. 20 years ago, a man named William went missing in the state of Florida after visiting a nightclub, with seemingly no trace left behind and no way to find where he went. But 2 decades later, someone was on Google Maps when they noticed something strange in a pond. The man was surveying for bus routes for his work when he saw what appeared to be a submerged car near the edge of the water. He called his ex-girlfriend to take a look and see if there was a car in the pond, but she couldn't see anything due to the murky water, so she contacted her neighbor. The neighbor flew his drone over the water and confirmed there was a car, contacting the authorities. They were able to remove the vehicle and did find human remains inside, later identifying them as the body of William. He had apparently lost control of his car, but due to no one living in the area at the time, it went unnoticed for 2 decades, the dirty water keeping his car hidden for years. Number 9. Stolen bicycle. In 2008, a man was riding his bicycle through Holland when he was approached by 2 men who stole his phone, money, and his bicycle. Due to the lack of any leads in the case, the police were unable to help him with recovering his stolen things, until 6 months later. He was looking through Google Street View at the exact place where the event had taken place, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The Street View car had passed by and taken a photo mere seconds before the crime happened. The view shows the man on his bicycle and the 2 men right behind him preparing their attack. Thanks to this, he was able to take the evidence to the police, who easily recognized the 2 men as brothers who were well known by the justice system and had committed crimes before. Number 8. The Dock. You may recognize this image as it went viral on social media when it was discovered and posted to the website Reddit. It shows a dock in Holland which appears to have a blood trail that leads to somebody's body. The user posted it saying that someone had been killed by their house, and this was photographic evidence of it. People were in a panic trying to solve the mystery and figure out who the person was and how this event had come to pass. Fortunately, however, some other people took the time to look further into the image and really look at the details of what was going on. It was revealed that the 2 figures at the end of the dock were not a criminal and a body, but instead just a man and his dog. What many thought was a blood trail was actually just the result of the dog having gone for a swim in the water and then trailing the moisture down the dock as he walked, the color just being the color of the wood when it gets wet. Number 7. Stolen car. Now for another case of the Google Street View car being in the right place at the right time. A man named David had his car stolen right out of his driveway, and he probably felt like the unluckiest guy on earth because he had just bought this new car after his first one had been destroyed by a joyrider. But in actuality, he was pretty lucky. His son decided to look up their home on Google Street View, something I'm sure we all did at some point when we were younger, and when he looked at the driveway, he realized that the Google car had actually managed to catch the thief in the act of stealing the van, with a full view of his face and what he was doing. The police believed that the camera had managed to catch the man just moments before he drove off. After convincing Google to unblur the license plate so they could confirm the evidence, they were able to make an arrest on the crime 2 years after it had taken place. Number 6. Swiss farm. When you think of Switzerland, you probably imagine snowy mountains and alpine skiing resorts, and you probably don't picture people running around on beautiful green farms. But they are there, and one particular one was growing a lot of corn when they were found out for growing something else. I don't think I can say exactly what they were growing, but I think you get what I'm expressing here. Anyways, they were hiding this other farm behind rows and rows of corn to keep it hidden from view. Unfortunately, they probably hadn't considered Google Earth managing to snap a picture of it from above, revealing to the police their illegal side hustle. The discovery led to the arrest of 16 different farmers and the confiscation of over a ton of grass. The police admitted that they hadn't actually been searching for what they found and called it a chance discovery. Number 5. Robbery. In 2011, a woman had her home broken into in Oklahoma City. The robbers had weapons and prevented her from interfering while they ransacked the home, the whole event taking place in broad daylight. She said that the whole thing lasted for over an hour and she was devastated and terrified. More so when the police told her that there was no forensic evidence or other leads that they could follow up on to identify the criminals and bring them to justice. So if it all took place inside the home, how did Google Earth manage to catch what was going on. Well, 3 years later in 2014, a friend was looking at the home on Google Street View when she saw a picture of two men walking down the street just outside the home. The men matched the description that the woman had given of the robbers, and with this evidence, the police were able to launch an appeal to get the case reopened and subsequently solved. Number 4. Tax dodging. During the 2000s, an Italian businessman attempted to carry out a tax evasion scheme, and he would have gotten away with it if it weren't for you meddling kids. The finance police discovered that the man had sold a villa in 2002, which was noted as having a specifically phallic-shaped pool. With this clue, they took to Google Earth to find the property and were quickly able to. It became clear when they saw the aerial view that the property was clearly worth much more, especially when compared to similar properties in the area. This then led to them checking into all of the man's dealings, including his bank account checks. These checks revealed various different omissions, which totaled to around 7 million euros of dodged taxes. I picked this one specifically because I think it's incredibly topical, with Shakira's hips recently being found out for lying about paying taxes as well. Number 3. 9 years. William wasn't the only case to be solved thanks to overhead imagery of a submerged car in a lake. In 2006, a 72-year-old man named David Niles walked out of his favorite bar in Michigan and was never seen again. A decade passed and no one had any clue where he went, his family eventually giving up any hopes of finding him. Almost 10 years later, a man was decorating his Christmas tree when he thought he saw something deep in the lake across the road. He took a look on Google Earth and it revealed the distinct shape of a car in the water, very similar to the image that revealed William's whereabouts. Cops were able to pull the car out and the remains of David were found inside, identified by his wallet. His son-in-law said, "For us today, it's a closure of a long search. Why God waited 9 years, I have no idea, but we're happy. It's good to have him home." Number 2. Blood Lake. In 2007, people who spent their time looking around on Google Earth discovered something that they felt was pretty startling. It's a lake in Iraq that is estimated to be 500 feet wide and around a half a mile long, and it's bright red. People immediately started speculating that this is from some sort of terrible crime, and it's a lake that has managed to be stained red by blood. Others suggesting that the color came about due to a butchery using it as a dumping ground. Innocent theories were that of a specific type of algae or pollution and chemicals changing the color of the water. Unfortunately, we will never actually know what caused the color, as if you look at the lake now, it's back to normal. I know this doesn't really count as a solved mystery, but maybe you know why it was red and you can let me know in the comments and you can be the one who solved it. Number 1. Secret swimming pools. While the majority of things on my list today have been individual crimes or reports, let me tell you about something that was discovered that was much more widespread. You may not know this, but in Athens, Greece, you need a special permit to be allowed to build a swimming pool on your land, and who the heck wants to pay for that? Reports show that there were only 324 pools in Athens, which investigators thought was just way too low a number. So financial crime investigators took to Google Earth to try and figure out the truth about what was going on. Within a few months, they had used the application to discover over 16,000 hidden and undeclared swimming pools on people's properties. The Greek government was cracking down on fraud at the time, and by tracking down the homeowners and collecting that pool tax, they were able to make a lot of cash. So if you're planning on hiding a swimming pool in Greece anytime soon, maybe consider a camouflage cover.
Starting us off at number 10 are Dewey's old favorite, dolls. Remember this one? Yeah, so in case you missed a few of our other Chernobyl videos, there are large piles of creepy, most likely possessed, burned up, radioactive dolls everywhere. Where are they coming from? Well, odds are most of these are actually coming from tourists and people looking to grab that one spooky and scary pic for the gram, but no one knows how this all came to be. It's hard to know if this started from actual dolls that witnessed the explosion or if someone just had the bright idea one day to start adding messed up dolls all over the exclusion zone. In the end, we will never know, because unless you are a regular there at the exclusion zone, it's hard to distinguish which dolls have been there since day one and which ones are new additions. Either way, I hate all of it. At number 9, we have missing silver filters. Remember those pile of creepy dolls? Yeah, of course you do, it literally just freaking happened. Well, in addition to the piles of dead dolls, there are also piles of old gas masks everywhere, especially in one old school classroom. Some cheeky and hilarious, sick person even put some of these masks on dolls. Isn't that great? Anyway, what is mysterious about these gas masks is that these filters inside of all of them have been removed, and these filters contain just a small amount of silver in them, and what is most likely what happened is that looters came and took all of them. But what was done with the silver? No one really knows. If looters did indeed steal them, then I'm guessing that somewhere out there some people have radioactive jewelry or even silverware, because they most likely sold it. It's hard to say, but if any of you watching have your own Geiger meters at home right now, I would check it out on anything silver in your home, because you might just have a Chernobyl souvenir without even knowing it. At number 8, we have survivor immortality. While this one doesn't take place in Chernobyl exactly, it stems from Chernobyl. One Russian scientist who survived the explosion back in 1986 and 6 other Russian scientists have recently relocated to the small Greek island of Gavdos. There is some conspiracy though, because some believe that these scientists actually relocated to the island to become immortal. Gavdos has 50 residents in total on the island, and it is believed to have mythical healing powers that make its residents immortal. Reporters from Vice interviewed a filmmaker who was making a documentary on the island and found out that the scientists work on various inventions from inside the local compound. They also have 7 acres of land that was given to them by a priest. Some think these Russian scientists are spies, while others believe they moved out there to not only become immortal themselves, but also clear them of all the radiation using the mystical powers of the island. They are apparently also building a temple named the Temple of Apollo. I think these guys were a little too close to the blast, if you know what I mean. At number 7, we have the random examination chair. Out in the middle of a wooded area in the exclusion zone is a random gynecologist's chair. How the hell did it get there? No one freaking knows. It can only be assumed that this chair was picked up by some local pranksters who went through the trouble of picking up this radioactive artifact and brought it to a random spot in the woods. But that is so much freaking work. I mean, guys, why? Aside from that, every other possibility is straight up terrifying. Maybe the blast blasted the chair out in the forest, but if it did, then why was there one of these chairs so close to a freaking radioactive reactor? See, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So it's just another unproven, less than appealing site that can be found in the exclusion zone. At number 6, we have silhouettes. You may remember this one from one of my other Chernobyl videos too. The mystery here is we have no idea if these silhouettes are actually based on real people or if it's just a morbid art piece done by another Chernobyl creepy artist. New silhouettes show up all of the time, all over the town of Pripyat, and the only other mystery here is who is behind it. Is it one talented artist, or is it a group that has decided to take turns so no one ever gets the true answer? No matter what, these things sure do add to the creep factor of this ghost town, and I'm sure it's also a terrifying sight to see at night. Coming in at our halfway point at number 5, we have a Chernobyl cover-up. In a documentary titled The Russian Woodpecker, Fyodor Alexandrovich explains a conspiracy theory that the Chernobyl blast was actually orchestrated to cover up the failure of the Russian woodpecker. Now, it wasn't a Russian bird or the Russian version of Woody the Woodpecker. The Russian woodpecker was actually an array radar that was meant to detect missiles before they were launched. The device was named after its woodpecker-like sound it would make during its operation. It cost 7 billion rubles and unfortunately did not work. It is suspected that it didn't work because of the northern lights messing with its signals, but it can't be for certain. So instead of suffering this terrible embarrassment, the Chernobyl plant that was known for its instability blew up, distracting everyone from the failure of the woodpecker. It's hard to say how likely all of this is, but when shooting the woodpecker documentary, apparently some pretty weird stuff happened to the documentary crew, such as visits from secret police services, as well as even one crew member being shot by a hidden sniper during the Euromaidan protests. Whatever the truth is here, it sounds like they were putting their nose where it wasn't wanted. At number 4, we have no containment building. Back in 1986, when the Chernobyl explosion actually happened, there was quite mysteriously no containment building that surrounded the reactors. Usually there are containment structures around radioactive places like the reactors located in Chernobyl. They are gas-tight structures that are usually made of steel reinforced concrete, so it can confine fission products that could release into the atmosphere during an accident if one were to happen. Sure enough, we all know that one happened here, and interestingly enough, it was not prepared for an accident that dangerous. According to author Richard Mueller of the book Physics for Future Presidents, The Science Behind the Headlines, if there would have been a containment unit around the reactors, Mueller believes that there would have been virtually no deaths. Interesting. I wonder if this coincides with any of the conspiracy of the Russian woodpecker as mentioned before. Maybe. Starting us off in our top 3, at number 3 we have alien saviors. In this case they quite literally came in peace. An eyewitness by the name of Mikhail Varitsky claimed to have seen a large fireball of light hovering above the reactor on the night of the explosion. Later on September 16th in 1989, apparently there was another huge radiation leak, and it is reported that this same ball of light was seen in the exact same spot once again. Many believe it to be aliens that were actually protecting us from the radioactive blast. Some claim that the blast was nowhere near as big as what it could have been, and that these aliens actually helped absorb and clean up whatever extra radiation that they could to save us. You know me, I'm all about the alien theories, but I'm not sure about this one. I will say, many say similar events happened during the Fukushima accident as well. Oh well, aliens, if you are listening to me right now and you did help us, thank you. Now, show yourself. At number 2, we had the Blackbird of Chernobyl. In April of 1986, right before the explosion in July, many reported seeing a large creature that looked like a blackbird flying around Chernobyl. This creature was large with red glowing eyes and was compared to America's legend, the Mothman. Why? What's so similar between a large Mothman and a large blackbird? Well, both of these creatures had large glowing red eyes, as well as both showed up right before major events. The Mothman appeared and was spotted right before the Silver Bridge collapse in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1967, which reportedly killed 46 people. Some survivors of the Chernobyl blast reported seeing this giant scary creature fly away from the reactor after the blast. Many believe that this bird was a paranormal entity that was a harbinger of terrible things to come. Others believe it was just a large stork. I don't know what to believe here, but the idea of a giant paranormal creature that is similar to the one that was seen in the US 20 years before gives me goosebumps in the best way possible. I love monster and ghost lore, which is what brings us to our number 1 spot. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have my favorite, ghosts. That's right, not just named a ghost town because it's abandoned, but also because there are many different spirits that are said to be found here. Andrei Karsukov, a nuclear physicist from New York, told one story after his visit to the area back in 1997. Karsukov reports that he went to the power station one day at 7:30 a.m. and visited the number 4 reactor in the sarcophagus. You know, the big containment unit structure that they should have had on there before the explosion? Yeah, that thing. Well, he could not go inside due to the high levels of radiation, but once he was down there, he could hear screams coming from the inside due to a fire. So what did he do? He ran upstairs to the control room to get help, and once he barged open the door, he was told that he was the first person to open that door in 3 years. He was also told that the only way in was where he was, and if someone came in after him, they would have tripped the alarm. So it was impossible for anyone else to be down there except him. There was also a floodlight that turned on and off at very strange moments, leading the crew to believe someone or something was in the building with them. But what was it? I don't know. You be the judge.
And we're starting off this list with encephalitis lethargica, also known as the sleeping sickness. This strange ailment swept across the world between 1917 and 1928, leaving medical professionals baffled and horrified. The epidemic affected millions of people with symptoms ranging from mild lethargy to severe cases of catatonia, where individuals would become completely motionless and unresponsive, almost like statues. The cause of the disease remained elusive as doctors struggled to find a definitive explanation for its origin and transmission. During the height of the epidemic, patients were observed in a trance-like state, often remaining immobile for weeks or even years. Some victims also experienced psychiatric symptoms such as hallucinations and delirium, and scientists had several theories, including viral infections or exposure to toxins, but none could provide a definitive explanation. The epidemic gradually subsided by the late 1920s, with sporadic cases occurring afterward, and that might be the strangest thing about this one. It seemed to just flare up and then disappear. Next up, we have Overton Bridge. Fair warning, if you ever find yourself in Scotland with your pet dog, do not take it to this bridge. Dogs seem to really enjoy leaping off of it. Overton Bridge, located near Dumbarton in Scotland, has gained quite the reputation due to its mysterious phenomenon associated with it. For decades, the bridge has been the site of a large number of dog deaths. They just leap off the bridge, and as to why they do so, no one knows. The peculiar incidents date back to the 1950s, with with over 50 dogs reportedly plunging from the same spot on the bridge. Even more strange is that dogs typically jump from the same side as well. Numerous theories have been proposed to try and explain the mystery surrounding the bridge. Some speculate that there may be an undetectable scent or maybe a sound that only dogs can hear that lures them to jump. Others have suggested supernatural or paranormal explanations, of course, but it still remains a mystery. Even after investigations, including studies by animal behaviorists and structural engineers. Number 8, the disappearance of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. It's a very famous one. This has to be the most perplexing aviation mystery in recent history. On March 8th of 2014, the Boeing 777 with 239 passengers and crew members on board seemed to vanish without a trace. The flight was en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing when just a little under an hour after takeoff, it disappeared from radar screens, leaving behind no distress signals or communication indicating any issues on board. The search for Flight 370 started in the Gulf of Thailand and the South China Sea, which was when the captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, last made contact with air traffic control before the plane disappeared from screens. It was soon discovered that the plane actually made a sharp turn, redirecting its route completely, flying for several hours before it would have eventually run out of fuel over the vast expanse of the southern Indian Ocean, where satellite data suggested the plane had likely gone down. Despite extensive efforts involving multiple countries and cutting-edge technology, though, no wreckage was initially found. Of course, a bunch of theories started being proposed. Possible mechanical failure, the captain deciding to take his own life, as well as the crew, conspiracy theories involving government cover-ups, even a UFO abduction. The disappearance of Flight 370 has left the families of the victims behind, desperate for some kind of closure and resolution. The Mary Celeste. Alright, we have a ghost ship on the list. It's December 4th, 1872. A ship is found floating in the Atlantic Ocean, completely empty. Empty of crew and passengers, that is. Everything else was intact. All the cargo remained, and there was no damage to the vessel. The only thing missing was a single lifeboat. The ship had set sail from New York 1 month prior, led by Captain Benjamin Briggs, along with his wife, daughter, and 7 other crew members. To this day, nobody knows how or why everyone went missing. Some speculated that the ship could have been attacked by pirates, but there was no sign of a struggle, and the last entry on the ship's daily log was completely ordinary. There were no signs that anything was amiss. It seemed as if everyone had just boarded the lifeboat and sailed off, never to be seen or heard from again. And at number 6, we have the deaths of the Jameson family. Bobby Dale Jameson, his wife Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter Madison vanished without a trace while on a trip to the rugged terrain of the San Bois Mountains in Oklahoma. The family's truck was discovered abandoned, and inside were their personal belongings, including wallets, $32,000 in cash, IDs, and their dog, who was fortunately still alive. There was no sign of a struggle in the truck, although police did find an 11-page hate letter written by Sherilyn to her husband. There was also surveillance footage taken outside of the Jamesons' home showing them making a number of trips from their property to the truck back and forth. They seemed to be moving in an almost trance-like state. So there were just so many ways that this thing could have gone, and it was impossible for authorities to actually figure out exactly what happened. The search for the Jameson family spanned months and involved extensive resources, but no sign of them was found until 4 years later, when the skeletal remains of the family was found just 3 miles from where their truck had been discovered. Authorities were never able to determine the cause of death, as their bodies were too decomposed, and to this day the circumstances surrounding their deaths are all but a mystery. Number 5, the feet mystery. Sounds pretty innocuous, but it's actually pretty disturbing. Since 2007, the discovery of severed feet along the coastlines of British Columbia have been found and remains a perplexing and eerie phenomenon till this day. The first severed foot was discovered by a young girl, of all people, in August of 2007 on Jedediah Island, and since then a total of 21 feet have been found in various locations along the coast. Speculation and theories have arisen, ranging from accidents at sea, of course foul play. Authorities have stated that they ruled out foul play, though, proposing that the feet most likely belonged to people who either took their own lives or died in accidents, and that the feet simply separated from the natural decomposition process, and then because they were in shoes, they remained buoyant and somewhat preserved until they finally floated onto shore. Extensive investigations examining missing persons cases, forensic analysis, and DNA testing were done, but there have still been no definitive answers. Number 4, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse Keepers. Located on a remote island off the coast of Scotland, this lighthouse was manned by 3 experienced keepers, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. On December 15th, a passing ship noticed that the lighthouse's light was not shining. A relief vessel was sent to investigate, only to find the island deserted and the keepers nowhere to be found. The lighthouse's door was unlocked, and a meal lay unfinished on the table, as if the keepers had just vanished abruptly out of thin air. Strangely, the logbook contained weird entries from December 12th describing severe storms and the men's increasingly erratic behavior. One entry mentioned something unusual, but its meaning was never deciphered. Various theories have emerged to explain the Flannan Isles Lighthouse Keepers' disappearance. Some speculate that they were swept away in a storm, others suggest foul play, and of course, with any unexplained event like this, some think there could be a ghost in the mix. Until this day, though, no conclusive evidence or an explanation has ever been found. The mysterious deaths at Dyatlov Pass. In late January of 1959, a group of 10 hikers led by Igor Dyatlov set out on a challenging trek through the Ural Mountains in Soviet Russia. Tragically, their expedition took a horrific turn, apparently. When the hikers failed to report back as planned, a search party was sent out. What they discovered at Dyatlov Pass was a scene of utter terror. The hikers' tent had been torn open from the inside. The group's belongings were left behind, and the search continued. The bodies of the hikers were found scattered in the surrounding area, some partially clothed and exhibiting horrifying injuries. Some victims had fractured skulls, crushed chest, or unexplained internal injuries, as if subjected to extreme force. Some theories point to an avalanche or severe weather conditions, while others suggest a possible attack of some kind. I think possible is a bit of an understatement there. They were obviously attacked by someone or something. Some people even think, maybe it was UFOs or a Yeti. However, none of these theories have ever been proven. The death of Mary Reeser. In the early morning hours of July 2nd in Petersburg, Florida, Mary's landlord arrived at her apartment with a telegraph, only to discover that the doorknob was hot to the touch. So she phoned the police. Firefighters arrived on the scene. However, what they discovered inside defied all logic and explanation. Amidst the charred remains of a chair the widow had been sitting on was Mary's body, which had been reduced to a pile of ash, with only a portion of her left foot remaining intact. There's a photo of that online, by the way, if you feel like Googling it. Pretty disturbing. The strangest part of the case was that the surrounding area, including the furniture, nearby objects, even a stack of newspapers, was just unscathed by the fire that had consumed her body completely. Forensic experts were utterly confused by the area of the fire's impact. It seemed to have solely targeted Mary Reeser's body, while sparing everything else in the room. Of course, theories and speculation began to spread, including the controversial concept of spontaneous human combustion, which I always smile when I say, because it reminds me of Spinal Tap, but it would be horrifying if it actually happened in real life, as it might have here. I don't know. This theory suggests that individuals can suddenly just burst into flames without an external ignition source. Pretty weird. Finally, though, we have one of my favorite UFO abduction accounts, the Travis Walton case. On November 5th, 1975, Travis and his crew of fellow loggers were working in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest in Arizona. They claimed to witness strange lights in the sky as they were driving back from their work site, and as they got closer to the light, they spotted a large glowing object hovering above the trees. Curiosity got the better of them, and Travis got out of the truck and approached approached the craft. The other guys were like pleading with him to come back to the truck, and then all of a sudden Travis was hit by a beam of light and seemingly lifted into the air. Panicked and frightened, the remaining loggers just fled the scene, leaving Travis behind. They soon decided though to turn back and retrieve him, but Travis was no longer there. They later reported the incident to local authorities, sparking of course a search for Travis, which lasted for 5 days. Astonishingly, Travis reappeared unharmed but deeply traumatized, recounting a bizarre tale of abduction and encounters with extraterrestrial beings. Short, bald, black eyes, your classic kind of gray alien. Makes this case even more interesting though is the corroboration by Travis's fellow loggers. All of them confirmed witnessing the same strange craft and the beam of light that struck Travis. They even took lie detector tests that all came back saying they were telling the truth, or at least believed that they had seen what they had seen. Now, polygraph tests, they're not always 100% credible, but it is interesting that all of them came back positive. Also, there is a movie about the Travis Walton case called Fire in the Sky. Very creepy movie, so if you're interested in this case at all, definitely check that one out.
Number 10. Wooden structures. Santa Fe National Forest in New Mexico has bizarre wooden structures all throughout the forest. No one knows who made them or why. The structures range in size, but have all been constructed out of fallen trees and limbs, with some reaching over 20 feet tall and dozens of diameter. They don't seem to have a pattern as to their locations, they simply appear. They do have a few things in common though. They resemble teepees, though no one can actually live inside them. Forage rangers will find anyone they catch making them, as they pose a fire risk, but they've never actually caught anyone. The Forest Service has no idea who's building them or why, but their response so far has been to dismantle any that are found. The destruction of these mystery structures is to eliminate the forest fire threat that they create. National Forest spokesperson Julie Ann Overton says whatever the structures are for, they are dangerous for the park and its visitors. They may have as many as 1,000 pieces of wood in them. The wood is seasoned and dry, and the design is similar to a classic kindling pyramid, but on a much larger scale. And to exacerbate the obvious fire danger, people appear to be using fire rings inside many of these structures. The Santa Fe National Park Service has issued a press release asking for any information about the mystery structures. According to the release, these structures are prohibited under federal law, and violators could face a fine up to $5,000 and possible imprisonment for up to 6 months. Now, does this have to do with a cult or Bigfoot? No one knows. Number 9. Bessie and Glenn Hyde. In 1928, Bessie and Glenn Hyde were honeymooning in northern Arizona at the Grand Canyon when they vanished. They were traveling down the Colorado River by boat in October and planned to boat through the Grand Canyon. Glenn had run tough rivers before, but Bessie was new at it. The couple ran across other boaters a few weeks before their disappearance who said they got the feeling that Bessie wanted to turn back, but Glenn was pushing her on. It was said if they completed the trip successfully, they would go on a paid lecture tour. So the trip was more than just fun, there was money at stake. Cut to several months later, the Hyde's boat was discovered that winter, seemingly undisturbed. It was upright and full of supplies, but the couple was gone. Now, there are many theories about what happened to the Hydes. Did they disembark and try a too difficult side hike? Did they have an argument that turned violent, or were they abducted? There are conflicting reports on what happened to the Hydes, and there have been more than one Bessie Hyde sighting in the years that followed. Number 8. Devil's Den. This name just sounds creepy. Devil's Den is a state park situated in Arkansas, but it's part of the larger Ozark National Park that surrounds it. Unexplained disappearances have been happening here for years, and in the 1940s, a girl named Catherine Vast Alst went missing while camping at the park with her family. She was barefoot and wearing only her swimsuit when she disappeared. Searches were conducted high and low for the missing girl, but it wasn't until 6 days later that she was found. The catch, she was still barefoot, still in her swimsuit, and totally unharmed. She also traveled over 30 miles and climbed 600 feet without getting a scratch on her. She wasn't even scared. No one, including her, has ever been able to explain it. Number 7. UFO sightings. Yosemite National Park in California has been the site of UFO reports for years. Visitors see strange lights and disc-shaped orbs have
and disc-shaped orbs hovering in the sky. Usually they disappear quickly, but people have managed to capture photos and videos to back up their claims. In 2002, several people in different sections of the park saw a lighted disc fly across the sky. It disappeared within minutes, only to be followed by Air Force jets, who circled the area a while, then left. As far as anyone knows, nothing was found, but the pictures and videos remain proof that it was there, whatever it might be. Number 6. Missing park ranger. On January 13th, 1980, Ranger Paul Fugate disappeared from what should have been a routine hike in Arizona's Chiricahua National Monument. Paul, who was last seen heading out to do a trail check around 2 p.m., told a coworker that they could start closing duties without him if he wasn't back by 4:30 p.m. He was then seen starting down the trailhead, and that was the last any person spoke or saw him. His girlfriend alerted authorities, who undertook a search for him. They first assumed that he had been the victim of an accident and was injured or stranded in the backcountry. However, as the investigation continued and no trace was found, suspicions began to rise. One park volunteer came forward to say that he'd seen Paul in a truck with 2 strange men, leading some to wonder if he had been kidnapped. Or some proposed he may have simply ditched his old life. Whatever the truth, no trace of Paul has ever been found since that day in 1980. To make things even more difficult, Chiricahua has 17 square miles of canyons, treacherous terrain, and wildlands. The search and rescue teams found absolutely nothing related to the park ranger. Number 5. Bennington Triangle. Paula Weldon was a student at Vermont's Bennington College and was familiar with the Green Mountain National Forest to the east of her college town. According to the Bennington Banner, Paula set off for the trail on December 1st, 1946, telling her roommate, "I'm off for a long walk," and she was wearing relatively light clothing. She apparently hitchhiked to the trail with local Louis Knapp, who gave a ride to a young woman matching her description. He dropped her off near the trail, and the last known person to see her was a watchman named Ernie Whiteman, who warned her about going into the cold landscape. Once it became clear that Paula had gone into the forest but hadn't left, a search was organized, but it was to no avail. Paula was actually one of 6 people who were reported missing near Bennington from 1945 to 1950. Their still unsolved disappearances helped them earn the nickname of the Bennington Triangle for the area. Number 4. Mishandling of cases. David Gonzalez went camping with his family in San Bernardino National Forest. At one point, he asked his mother if he could go get some cookies from the family car. 40 minutes passed, and his mother realized that David never returned and that the cookies he wanted to grab were still inside the car. He was never found alive again. His death is viewed as one of the strangest disappearances in national parks. A week later, his badly decomposed body was found only a mile away from where he went missing. This area was already combed days prior, so this means that he must have been dropped there by someone or something. An autopsy revealed no trauma and no overt injury. He was just dead, without any reason or clue as to why. This is already baffling, especially considering the power of forensics and the skill of investigators, but what makes the case of David so strange is not his disappearance alone, it's the way the local authorities and investigators seem to handle the case. The officials claim that David was dragged off by a mountain lion, despite no injuries that would suggest that being his fate. No one nearby heard David scream either. David's parents have gone on record to say they don't believe David got dragged off by a cougar, they believe he was kidnapped, and that he still may be alive somewhere and that the body wasn't his. Some believe that authorities know more than what they're saying. Are they covering up something that we don't know about? What are they hiding from us? Number 3. The missing family. 7.5 months after the Coden family was reportedly missing in 1974, police found their bodies. The Codens had gone camping in the Siskiyou Mountains in Applegate, Oregon over Labor Day weekend in 1974, but failed to show up for dinner at Richard Cohen's mother's house on September 1st. Media accounts from the time described their campsite as undisturbed, as if the family left abruptly. Investigators had later assumed that they had been abducted. Their bodies were then discovered in April 1975, about 100 feet from the campsite. Richard's body was found tied to a tree, while the bodies of his wife, son, and daughter were found in a cave with rocks sealing the entrance. Dwayne Lee Little, a criminal serving 2 life sentences, allegedly confessed to a fellow inmate that he ended the life of the Codens while on parole. But there was no conviction, and the case remains open. Number 2. The Yuck The Yucca Man. Few people can confidently tell you what exactly is the nature of being popularly known as the Yucca Man. Spotted around California's Joshua Tree National Park, Yucca Man has been variously interpreted as an unknown but real cryptid. Longreads notes that many reports of the Yucca Man began to arise in the 1970s when more and more people were settling the area with housing developments and exploring the park through hiking and camping. People report that the creature is often announced by its gut-wrenching body odor, while others have spotted its massive hulk amongst the brush or seen huge footprints in the soil. Many agree that it's covered in hair and often sports glowing red eyes. Even military personnel at nearby Edwards Air Force Base have encountered a very similar creature nicknamed Blue Eyes. Whatever the creature is, it sounds terrifying to me. And coming in at number 1 is cave systems. Dennis Martin was on a camping trip near the Tennessee-North Carolina state line with his family in the summer of 1969. It was an annual Father's Day tradition. They headed to Smoky Mountain National Park to camp and hike. Now Dennis and his brothers had planned a prank. They were going to hide separately in the bush and jump out on different sides of the campsite to scare them. They did the prank, but then they realized that Dennis was missing. Family, park rangers, and other hikers spread out to search for Dennis almost immediately, but he was nowhere to be found. That evening there was heavy rainfall, which is bad news when you're trying to track someone. The search for Dennis became the largest in National Park Service history. One of the people searching was Park Ranger Dwight McCarter, who had successfully tracked down hundreds of missing persons. Dwight was a seasoned tracker, and he was struck by the complete lack of any sort of tracks. Dennis seemed to have disappeared completely, leaving no trace at all. Now, people's disappearances at national parks have prompted people to question how a map of missing persons in the US lines up with America's largest cave systems. Are these people disappearing and being taken to these caves by cave people, animals, or some sort of creature? The mystery still remains, but I think caves are the best place to look for our answers. Number 10. The WOW signal. In 1977, astronomer Jerry Ellman was researching at The Ohio State University when an incredible and unexplainable radio signal was detected using the school's Big Ear telescope. In those days, information was run through what was called an IBM 1130 mainframe computer before being printed on paper and then studied by hand. Upon reviewing the findings, Jerry came across something he had never seen before. There, in a vertical column, was the sequence 6EQUJ5. Jerry was amazed and immediately circled the sequence and wrote "Wow" right beside it. Hence the name. The signal they picked up had come from nearly 220 million light years away, and there was no explanation as to how or why a radio signal could be detected from that distance. It immediately became a sensation in both the science community and the rest of the world, and was used to support the search for alien life in the universe. Jerry himself says he's convinced that it certainly has the potential to be the first signal from extraterrestrial intelligence, and I agree. Number 9. Einstein's last words. Albert Einstein was a German-born theoretical physicist, widely acknowledged to be one of the greatest and most influential physicists of all time. Einstein is best known for developing the theory of relativity, but he also made important contributions to the development of theory of quantum mechanics. Einstein passed away at Princeton Hospital, New Jersey on April 18, 1955. He died because of internal bleeding caused by a rupture of an abdominal aortic aneurysm. Einstein knew he was going to die, as he refused treatment because he didn't believe in prolonging life artificially. There was a nurse present at the time of Einstein's death, and she actually heard him mutter something, but she didn't know exactly what it was, as she couldn't understand German. Maybe Einstein revealed an incredibly important realization, or he just said goodbye to the world in his native language. But guess what? We'll never know, and this will be one mystery that can't be solved. Number 8. Genghis Khan burial site. Genghis Khan was the founder and first Khagan of the Mongol Empire, which later became the largest adjoining land empire in history. Having spent the majority of his life uniting the Mongol tribes, he launched a series of military campaigns which conquered large parts of China and Central Asia. He achieved everything he wanted, but the emperor died during the fall of Yunchuan, which is now part of China. The reasons for his death are unclear, as well as the place he was buried in. Researchers think it might be somewhere in the vicinity of the Mongol sacred mountain of Burkhan Khaldun in current northeastern Mongolia. According to legend, he asked to be buried without markings or any sign, and after he died, his body was returned to present-day Mongolia. Marco Polo wrote that even by the 13th century, the Mongols did not know the location of the tomb. Another folkloric legend says that a river was diverted over his grave to make it impossible to find. Other tales state that his grave was stamped over by many horses, that trees were planted over the site, and that the permafrost also played its part in the hiding of the burial site, but to this day, we still don't know where it is. Number 7. City of Atlantis. Writing in the 4th century BC, the Greek philosopher Plato told a story of a land named Atlantis that existed in the Atlantic Ocean and supposedly conquered much of Europe and Africa in prehistoric times. In the story, the prehistoric Athenians strike back against Atlantis in a conflict that ends with Atlantis vanishing beneath the waves. While no serious scholar believes that the story is literally true, they have speculated that the legend could have been inspired in part by real events that happened in Greek history. Many believe that the lost city of Atlantis story was an allegory created by Plato to illustrate the dangers of hubris and greed. In contrast, others point to evidence of ancient cultures in the Mediterranean that could have been connected to Atlantis. This story has captivated people's imaginations for centuries, with theories about its location ranging from a sunken island near the Azores to civilization in Antarctica. Despite extensive research and exploration, the truth behind Atlantis remains unknown, and the mystery may never be solved. Whatever the truth, the lost city of Atlantis will likely remain a mystery for generations. Number 6. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer active in and around the Whitechapel district of London, England in the autumn of 1888. Attacks ascribed to Jack the Ripper typically involved a female night worker who lived in and worked in the East End of London. Their throats were cut prior to abdominal mutilations, and the removal of internal organs from the last 3 of the victims led to speculation that Jack had some anatomical or surgical knowledge. Rumors that the deaths were connected intensified in September and October 1888, and numerous letters were received by media outlets and Scotland Yard from individuals claiming to be responsible. The From Hell letter received by George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee was allegedly sent from Jack the Ripper, and it came with a half-preserved human kidney, reportedly taken from one of the victims. Now, most of the reports done by the police were destroyed during World War II, but what from remains, we are able to learn that more than 2,000 people were interviewed, upwards of 300 people were investigated, and 80 people were detained. However, there was no conclusion to who the killer was. But to ease your minds, Jack the Ripper has to be dead now, so no worrying about him. Number 5. Tomb of Cleopatra. Ancient writers claim that Cleopatra VII and her lover Mark Antony were buried together in a tomb after their deaths in 30 BC. The writer Plutarch wrote that the tomb was located near the Temple of Isis, an ancient Egyptian goddess, and was lofty and beautiful monument containing treasures made of gold, silver, emeralds, pearls, ebony, and ivory. But the location of the tomb remains a mystery. In 2010, Hazay Hawass, Egypt's former antiques minister, conducted excavations at a site near Alexandria which contained a number of tombs dating to the era when Cleopatra ruled Egypt. While many interesting archaeological discoveries were made, Cleopatra VII's tomb was not among them, he reported in a series of news releases. Archaeologists have noted that even if Cleopatra's tomb does survive to this day, it may have been heavily plundered and unidentifiable, so it seems like nobody will be finding that treasure anytime soon. Number 4. The Copper Scroll. The Copper Scroll is one of the most mysterious artifacts in history. It was discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1952 and is believed to be around 2,000 years old. The scroll consists of 2 copper sheets covered with a text written in ancient Hebrew script. It contains a list of 64 items or locations of hidden treasure, including gold and silver coins, sacramental vessels, and other valuable items. The scroll is not only remarkable because of its age, but also because it is the only known ancient text written on metal. This means that it has been preserved much better than other scrolls that have degraded over time. Now, despite its incredible age, many items on the list remain a mystery, and their locations have yet to be discovered. There have been many attempts to decipher the Copper Scroll, but no one has been able to make sense of it. yet. Some experts believe that the scroll could provide valuable information about the history of Jewish people in the region at the time, while others think it's simply a hoax. Whatever the case, the Copper Scroll remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Number 3. Julius Caesar's son. One of the most enduring mysteries of the Roman Empire surrounds the existence of Julius Caesar's son. Some sources claim that he was adopted by Julius Caesar and named Caesarion, while others allege that he was the illegitimate child of the Roman leader and Cleopatra. Regardless of which version of the story is authentic, there's no denying that the case of Caesarion has yet to be solved. The only evidence of his existence comes from ancient texts, which refer to him as both as an adopted son of Caesar and an illegitimate child of Cleopatra. However, none of these texts can be verified, leaving its true origin unknown. It's also unclear what became of him after Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, leaving some historians to speculate that he may have had his life ended or gone into hiding. While the mystery of Caesarion may never be solved, it does make for an exciting tale to contemplate. Did he exist? What became of him? Was he ever genuinely recognized as Julius Caesar's son? These questions remain unanswered, but perhaps the truth about Caesarion will come to light one day. Number 2. The Sumerians. The Sumer are the earliest known civilization that was located in the historical region of southern Mesopotamia, aka current Iraq. Sumerians were the first to use a written language, they invented a number system, the first wheeled vehicles, sun-dried bricks, and irrigation for farming. But historians are not completely sure where they came from. They had an isolated language, meaning that it was not related to surrounding languages, so that makes it difficult to trace their journey. They suggest that the Sumerians may have come from North Africa, while according to some other data, they might have originated in Caucasus. There are even more theories, and it just shows how mysterious the origins of the people who created the first human civilization are. And coming in at number 1 is the Money Pit. The Oak Island Money Pit is a mysterious site on Nova Scotia's Oak Island that has been rumored to contain buried treasure. The legend of the Money Pit dates back to 1795 when 3 boys discovered a depression on the island and found a layer of flagstones beneath. What began as an innocent exploration quickly became a massive treasure hunt, with hundreds of searchers excavating the island for over 200 years. The Money Pit has been dug down more than 200 feet, but many believe that the treasure lies much more deep, like as deep as 500 feet. As the diggers have gone deeper, they've encountered multiple booby traps, such as flood tunnels and stone plugs designed to protect whatever lies at the bottom. So far, the only artifacts that have been discovered are 2 links of a gold chain and a stone inscribed with the letters VI and C, which some believe stands for Viva Cristo. Despite these discoveries, the mystery of the Money Pit remains unsolved. Many believe it contains a great treasure, while others think it may be a hoax. While hundreds of theories have been proposed, from hidden pirate booty to ancient Native American artifacts, no one knows what lies at the bottom of Oak Island Money Pit, and I'm not sure we ever will. Coming in at number 10 is Lawrence Joseph Bader. At the time of his disappearance in 1957, Bader was in some hot waters financially, in trouble with the IRS, and with a wife who was due any day with the couple's 4th kid. Bader was overwhelmed by the world around him and believed there was only one thing he could do. So one night in 57, after paying the premium on his life insurance policy, Bader packed his suitcase, kissed his wife, and said he was going on a fishing trip. Next, he rented a boat, despite being warned there was a dangerous storm heading his way, and sailed off. The next day, the boat was found washed up on the shore, empty, with no sign of Bader or his luggage. After an investigation that proved fruitless, Bader was declared dead, and his family was devastated, but went on to live their life without him for the next 8 years. That was until his niece ran into a strangely familiar man who looked just like her supposed to be dead uncle. The man denied being who she thought he was, but later fingerprints confirmed that the man who went by the name Fritz Johnson was indeed the long-lost Lawrence Bader. But there was a twist. Bader, or Johnson as he now went by, had no recollection of his former life, and appeared to have suffered amnesia. But now found alive, his former wife was required to repay the life insurance and break off her engagement with the new beau since she was Catholic. Some say the amnesia was all an act, but he also had a sizable brain tumor that others believed could have caused the memory loss. Either way, it's a wild story. Coming in at number 9 is Timothy Carney. While on his way to work in September of 2000, 2004, Timothy realized he was running a little late and called his employer to let him know. But when he never showed up, his colleagues began to feel worried. Then later, after his car was found abandoned, family and friends of the 25-year-old began to fear that he may have been kidnapped and began renting billboards pleading for his safe return home. Sadly, no such calls with his whereabouts were ever made, and eventually the case went cold. But 7 years later, the family got the strangest news, that their son's missing persons case had been cleared from the national database as he had finally been found. However, after a brief moment of relief, they were next informed that Timothy was not interested in speaking with them, nor would he permit that his location be revealed. While no one is quite sure exactly what he was doing while hiding out for 7 years, due to the fact that he's declined to go into detail, his parents suspect he got wrapped up with a local church that has on more than one occasion been accused of cult-like behavior. If that's true, he certainly wouldn't be the first victim of a cult that convinced its victims to stay away from their family. However, Timothy has allegedly denied the claims that his disappearance had anything to do with that. So really, who knows what the hell happened. Coming in at number 8, Lula Gillespie Miller. Soon after bringing her third little one into the world in 1974, Lula mysteriously signed her kids into her parents' custody, left her home, and walked off without a trace. Soon after she disappeared, her parents filed a missing persons report. Then, about a year later, in 1975, the family received a letter from Lula, and although relieved that she was alive, that was the last they heard from her for years. For the next 41 years, still considered a missing person by authorities, Lula stayed silent, away from her family and living her life. She never committed any crimes while in hiding, nor was she running away from any that anyone knew of, and so the great mystery of why a woman ran away from her life remained a mystery. Of course, there were many investigations over the 41 years that looked into her disappearance, some believing she had taken her own life, others believing she was kidnapped, until finally in 2016, authorities tracked her down in a small town in South Texas, where she had apparently been living since the 90s under an assumed name. Once found, Lula declined to give any explanation about her disappearance from her life in Indiana, but did grant her contact information to be given to her family so that they could reach out if they wanted to. Coming in at number 7 is Denise Bolser. When Denise Bolser's husband came home on January 17th, 1985, he was horrified to find a threatening note that read, "We've got your wife," and immediately contacted the authorities so that they could start the investigation. A few days later, police discovered her husband's pickup truck abandoned at the airport with Denise's social security, birth certificate, and credit cards all inside. But things took a turn a few months later when a courier service where she worked as a bookkeeper accused her of embezzling nearly $100,000. And by 1986, police were able to charge her with the crimes in absentia, now putting together the puzzle pieces of this strange case. However, in one last twist, the embezzlement charges against her were dropped, leaving everyone just as confused as they were at the beginning. Fast forward 16 years, and a PI named Shirley Casey discovered that runaway Denise was hiding out in Florida under the name Denise James. And when authorities went to confirm the lead, they found out that Denise had started a whole new family that were completely unaware of her sordid past. Denise claims she ran away after her ex-boss threatened her life, drove her husband's truck to the airport, and never looked back. Coming in at number 6 is Michelle Whitaker. After being dropped off at a truck stop by a friend in August of 2002, Michelle vanished into thin air. At first, it was believed that her friend may have had something to do with her disappearance until one of her co-workers, Heather, disappeared 1 month later. Unaware of the connection with Michelle at first, police immediately focused on Heather's boyfriend, Jonathan Vick, who happened to be a suspect from a previous unsolved SA case. But once they realized the connection between Heather, Michelle, and Jonathan, they began to feel worried that they had a homicide case on their hands. Police began looking for any sign that Michelle still could be alive, but her credit report and social security showed no activity for years, and although they didn't have any proof yet, they began to really worry that Michelle had been killed. Then in the summer of 2008, 6 years after Michelle disappeared, a woman was watching an episode of Forensic Files, and was shocked to see one of the victims of a killer featured on the episode was none other than her next door neighbor. Confused, she called the police to let them know that she was in fact alive and living in Oregon. In August of 2008, police officially announced that Michelle had been found alive, apparently completely unaware that she had been the subject of a killing investigation. But why did she run away? Apparently, at the time she went missing, Michelle had recently been arrested for a DUI and was mistakenly released early from jail, so she ran away to start a new life. Coming in at number 5 is Cynthia Ann Parker. By the early 1800s, European colonization was resulting in major population drop in indigenous villages. As a result, some territories resorted to kidnapping as a way to increase their numbers. One of the most famous was on May 19, 1836, during the Fort Parker Massacre, when 9-year-old Cynthia Ann Parker was taken from her Texas farm and brought to live amongst the Comanche. Now, as far as the Texans were concerned, Parker was missing for 20 years, and they continued to search for her at her father's request, but little to their knowledge, Cynthia had actually become completely assimilated among the village. When first brought in, she was adopted by a couple who raised her as their own, and eventually she married the chief, Petacuna, with whom she had 3 children. It is believed that Cynthia would have stayed with the Comanche until her dying days. However, in 1860, the Texas Rangers finally tracked her down, and believing that they were rescuing her, raided the village, killed her husband along with many other civilians, and brought Cynthia and her daughter back to her childhood home. Her reunion with her white family was not the storybook her father expected. She was angry that she was forced to leave behind her 2 sons, and never really assimilated back into white civilization. Banned from ever returning to the Comanche, Cynthia was forced to live the rest of her life under the supervision of her brother and uncle. Then, after her daughter died from pneumonia in 1864, with nothing else to live for, Cynthia slipped into a deep depression, eventually refusing to eat or drink until she died in 1871. Coming in at number 4 is Petra Pazitska. The year was 1984 when 24-year-old Petra went to the dentist and never returned home. As is often the case with disappearance of young women, police immediately feared and suspected that she had been killed, so a massive search for the college student began. For a while after her mysterious disappearance, Petra's case was featured on a true crime show, and then in 1987, a suspect for her homicide was found, or so they thought. The man, identified as Gunter K., confessed to police that he killed Petra, as well as another teen girl in the same part of Germany. Frankly, the police had no reason to believe he was lying, and even after he withdrew his confession, it was still believed he was the killer. By 1989, Petra was officially declared dead, and for the next 26 years, the world believed she died at the hands of Gunter K. That was until 2015, when a woman named Mrs. Schneider called the police after her apartment was robbed, but when she was unable to produce any ID, she eventually fessed up to being the missing woman. Evidently, she had managed to escape out of the public eye by never opening a bank account, or getting her driver's license, or a social security card, but because she hadn't actually committed any criminal activity, she couldn't be charged with anything. To this day, Petra refuses to explain why she went into hiding, and police say she was not interested in providing the public or her family with any further information. Coming in at number 3, B.K. Doe. In 2004, a Burger King employee discovered a naked man covered in fire ants sleeping next to one of the dumpsters in the alleyway. Disturbed and worried, the employee immediately called the police, who took the stranger to the hospital. Once admitted, hospital staff tried to get information from him, but he was unable to recall his name, so he was entered into hospital records as Burger King Doe. As the days went by, BK, as he was referred to, began to recall some things. He knew he had 3 brothers, and he knew his birthday was August 29, 1948. But still, his actual identity remained a mystery to him and everyone around him. Years went by, and he eventually named himself Benjamin Kyle and began living a new life. At one point in time, he was actually on the FBI's missing persons page, which was the first time the Bureau had ever put a missing persons report out for someone whose location was known. He even appeared on an episode of Dr. Phil. But no matter what Benjamin did, he began to lose hope that he would ever figure out who he really was. But incredibly, in 2016, a genealogist came to the rescue. As it turns out, Benjamin was actually William Burgess Powell, a man who had been missing since 19
1976. However, the mystery did not end there. Even though he now had a name, there was still a huge gap. He had already been a missing person for 28 years before he was found by the Burger King dumpster, and there was no record to show where he was all those years or why he disappeared in the first place. Coming in at number 2, Carlos Sanchez Ortiz. After receiving his medical degree in 1996, promising young Dr. Carlos, who secretly suffered severe depression, decided he'd had enough of the chaotic world around him and wandered off into the woods without any warning. But after a 14-year-long search by the Spanish authorities left them without answers, the case pretty much went cold and Carlos was officially declared dead in 2010. So imagine how the two mushroom pickers that were foraging a national park off the coast of Tuscany felt when they ran into him. Despite being missing for nearly 20 years and considered legally dead for 5, Carlos was in fact very much alive. He was just living his own life in solitude as far away from civilization as possible. Nervous that he might be dangerous, the hikers ran away to get a ranger and brought him back to the site. The ranger asked a few questions about who he was, to which Carlos showed an expired passport. However, Carlos was not looking to be found. In fact, he was quite annoyed and mentioned he was now going to need to move his camp so as not to be discovered by anyone else. And last up in our number 1 spot today is JC Duggard. On the morning of June 10th, 1991, 11-year-old JC was walking to the bus stop when a suspicious gray car pulled over and tased her until she was unconscious. This tragedy, of course, ensued a giant investigation, as well as multiple search parties, but as days turned into weeks and weeks turned into years, local authorities began to lose hope. Meanwhile, JC was, in fact, alive, chained up in Philip and Nancy Garrido's shed in the backyard, and assaulted daily by her captor. At the time, Philip was on parole from a previous essay and kidnapping charge, but despite multiple visits from his officers, the backyard was never searched, and JC remained hidden from the public. For the next 18 years, she was a prisoner, forced into bearing and raising 2 of Philip's offspring, and eventually gave up all hope of escaping her living nightmare. But one day in 2009, Philip, who I should also mention was a self-proclaimed evangelist, brought his and JC's daughters on an excursion to Berkeley, attempting to organize a religious event on the campus. But the event manager felt that something was off with the man and how the girls were acting around him, so she got campus police to run a background check. It didn't take long before they figured out his history, and with that, his parole officer was immediately contacted. Thankfully, Duggard was rescued from her prison in the backyard, and the disgusting people that kidnapped and tortured her were sentenced to a lifetime in prison.
But coming in at number 10, what came before the Big Bang? So the Big Bang was what started the universe billions of Earth years ago. But what came before that? We honestly don't really know, and our smartest minds theorize the answer is extremely simple. Stephen Hawking noted that the answer could literally be nothing. We have no observable evidence of what came before everything. I come from the Top 10 Nerd channel, and this question has been answered in different ways in comic books. In Marvel, they say that we are in a version of the cosmos, meaning there was a previous version that ended up getting destroyed and remade. But if that's the case, what's doing the destroying and the remaking? If nothing came before, then what the heck caused the Big Bang in the first place? If there was something before, what would that do to the way we think about the universe? And if something is responsible for it all, I don't know if our tiny little human brains could actually handle that. Number 9. Gravity paradox. This question is a pretty simple one, but yet it's got a lot of scientists kind of completely stumped. Why can a refrigerator magnet defy an entire planet's gravitational pull? It's basically asking why gravity can be such a strong force in the universe but also be such a weak one in other instances. Some scientists believe that gravity may well be as strong as other forces like electromagnetism and the force that holds the nucleus together, but they think that gravity's influence is dissipated because it leaks into extra dimensions. That's just a theory though, because we actually have no idea.
That one little question about refrigerator magnets has kind of brought the whole idea of gravity into question. If it is being dissipated into extra dimensions, that opens up way more questions than it actually answers. Obviously, I'm not smart enough to answer this question. I am, after all, just a YouTube host, not a scientist, but I would just think it's all subjective, right? Like, a planet is so huge that the things that are on the planet would have to follow different gravitational rules, right? And like a magnet is still being affected by the Earth's gravity, it's just so small in comparison that it can do its own thing? I'm literally talking out my butt right now. I honestly don't know what I'm talking about. We should just move on before I make myself sound more dumb than I already am. Number 8. How big is the universe? I don't know if you guys have seen that clip from Pete Holmes' stand-up routine, but he talks about how none of any of this makes any sense. The universe is constantly expanding and infinitely. Infinity is getting bigger, and like Pete says, that makes no freaking sense. If the universe is constantly expanding, and we know it's constantly expanding, then when posed with the question of how big the universe is, someone would be able to give you an answer, but we don't actually have a number for that because we literally don't know the shape of the universe, and we don't know the actual rate at which the universe is expanding, we just know that it is. To me, this question almost doesn't matter for most of us because even if we were to try to go to the edge of the universe, no one here can live long enough to make that journey. It takes roughly 9 to 12 years to get to Pluto, and that's just the furthest planet, yes I'm calling it a planet, in our solar system, which itself is just an extremely tiny speck in our Milky Way galaxy, which is also just a tiny speck in the vastness of the universe. It's all too big. Is what I'm basically saying here. Number 7, expansion. The last point does lead me nicely into this next point though, which is the fact that while we know the universe is constantly expanding, we can't actually put a pin on the rate at which it is actually expanding. For the past 6 years, the Hubble Space Telescope has been calculating the speed at which the universe is expanding, and recently came up with what is accepted as the most precise measurement to date, except that the rate stands in direct conflict with independent measurements of the early universe's expansion. That's unsettling for astrophysicists because it means we know even less about our universe and its ways than we thought we did. But if we do learn this one, would that be a good thing? Or would it just help us all feel more and more meaningless and tiny? Of course, these are scientific questions, so our emotions about these things aren't really important, but I'm just saying, I already feel small and insignificant. Number 6, the multiverse. If you have been keeping up with the MCU, then you are at least familiar with the idea of a multiverse. Essentially, it means that if you go far enough into the universe, things would have to start repeating because there's only a finite number of ways that particles can be arranged in space and time. According to theories, the universe is flat and infinite, so those particles would have to repeat, creating another universe with another Earth and yes, another you. And because it's all infinite, there would be infinite versions of you who could be doing the exact same things as you right now, or maybe they wore different clothes today, or had a completely different job, or honestly, there are an infinite number of variables here. The thing is, we will most likely never know if this theory is true or not. And even if we did, that means there would be an evil alternate you, or maybe you are the evil alternate one. I don't know about that one, man. I don't like that. Number 5, what the heck is dark matter? Dark matter gives out no light, or at least too little light for us to detect. We know it exists because we see the effect of its gravity on the stars and the galaxies, like the Milky Way, which could not have dragged in enough matter to make its own stars in the 13.82 billion years since the Big Bang without there being a lot of invisible matter whose extra gravity helped speed things along. I hope that wasn't too confusing. The European Space Agency Planck satellite found that dark matter accounts for 26.8% of the mass energy of the universe compared with the 4.5% of normal atomic matter. This basically means that dark matter outweighs the visible stars and galaxies that we can actually see by a factor of about 6. And yet, no Earth-based experiment has found any evidence of dark matter at all. And we have been looking for a long time. It's totally possible that our theory of matter, or more likely our theory of gravity, needs to be reworked and fiddled with. It's also possible that maybe the universe is filled with dark stars and dark planets and dark life. What does that even mean? I don't know. Do you know? Because I don't. Number 4, what is time and does it even exist? So, when we talk about time, we imagine it flowing, like a river, like a time stream. But for something to flow, by definition, it has to flow with respect to something else, like how a river flows with respect to a river bank. So, does time flow with respect to something else? Another kind of time? Maybe? I don't know. The idea seems kind of stupid and kind of just made up, but most likely the flow of time is an illusion that we created on our own with our brains to organize the information constantly flooding in through our senses. We also have a strong sense of a shared past, present, and future. However, the idea of a common present, meaning the time right now that everyone's in, doesn't actually exist in our understanding of relativity. Precisely how someone else's time is sliced up depends on how fast they are moving relative to you or the strength of the gravity they are experiencing. These effects are only really noticeable with things like the speed of light and supermassive gravity, which is why they are not super obvious to us in everyday life. But it basically means the idea that one person's interval of time is not the same as another person's, and that one person's interval of time is not the same as another's. If you watch Interstellar, there's a pretty basic explanation of this, as different members of the crew age differently as they split up to different places around a massive black hole and other planets whose gravities affect all the characters differently time-wise. It's just, my brain hurts actually a lot right now. Number 3, do we have everything wrong? Isaac Newton's theory of gravity was accurate enough to fly spacecraft to the moon, but it began breaking down when extremely high speeds and very strong gravitational fields became known to us. Then, Einstein's theory of general relativity came in and was a better alternative. It correctly describes the bending of starlight by gravity, the orbital decay of binary pulsars, and the warping of space-time around a black hole. Really cool stuff like that. General relativity is currently physicists' best theory of gravity, but it doesn't answer everything, obviously, which is why history will probably repeat itself and physicists might discover small effects that would hint at an even better theory of gravity. Einstein's theory has passed most of the things that might test it with flying colors, but physicists will keep putting their theories on the rack. One day it may even fail, not being completely wrong, but just one small part to a bigger puzzle that none of us will be alive to learn the answer to. Number 2, Earth, Martians. Oh boy, this one's a doozy. Okay, so look, we take it for granted that life on Earth actually began here. We just kind of assume that that's the way things worked. But that's not actually necessarily accurate. Apparently, scientists are actually finding evidence that life on Earth may have instead come from Mars, and was brought to this planet by like a meteorite at some point in Earth's incredibly long history. The trouble is that scientists themselves can't even agree on which area of science will provide the answer to this conundrum, and let alone whether science is even where we should look to answer it, which, like Pete said about the universe's expansion, that makes no frickin' sense. What do you mean? What do you mean we can't? What? Number 1, aliens. Since the early 1960s, scientists have theorized that it's extremely likely that intelligent life exists outside of Earth, and I, for one, totally agree. The math kind of has to mean it's true. The universe is ever expanding, infinite, and contains countless other galaxies just like ours, with planets that would be in the similar position as ours is to their sun, and with the right conditions for life to actually thrive and grow, like the planet Kepler 186f, which you should look up if you haven't before, it's kinda cool. The trouble is that we have basically zero scientific evidence to prove that the life could potentially exist, or does in fact exist. In fact, we have no hard scientific evidence that any life exists outside of Earth. Although with that planet, we actually just can't see that far down onto like the surface of the planet to see what's going on. So it could be there, we just can't see it. Although we are finding some fun stuff on Mars that may say otherwise. The time may be drawing closer and closer to when science confirms that there is life elsewhere in our solar system or the galaxy, or at least somewhere in the universe. And I really hope I'm alive for that. The thing that gets me though is, if whatever is out there is advanced enough to see us too, and if it is advanced enough to see us, then is it advanced enough to make it here? And if that's the case, then we are not as advanced as that, and we should stand no chance in defending ourselves against something like that, assuming they would want to hurt us, which as humans we would just assume they would, and if they didn't, I think our stupid human brains wouldn't be able to handle the fear of not knowing, and we'd do something dumb like attack them, and then we'd be gone because we just can't stand up to that kind of thing, you know what I'm saying?
Starting us off at number 10 is death by water. One of the fundamentals of human life is that we need water to survive. Not only that, we're made up of approximately 60% water. We sweat water, we clean ourselves with water, and essentially rely on it to get through the day. So what happens when someone is allergic to water? Well, their life becomes about 100 times more complicated. One of the biggest mysteries in the medical field is an extremely rare condition called aquatogenic urticaria, where the skin breaks out into extremely painful hives or rash anytime it's exposed to water. As of a 2013 medical review, only 37 cases have been reported since 1964, most of which were female, as well as most reporting the condition only arose during or right after puberty began. What's insane about this condition is that not only are the afflicted often allergic to rainwater, snow, fresh water, and seawater, but many are allergic to their own sweat and tears, and even worse is that some people get rashes or welts on their lips and mouth area from just trying to drink enough water to stay alive. While there are a few theories out there about what could cause this peculiar nightmare condition, the underlying cause has never been confirmed and continues to perplex the medical community to no end. Coming in at number 9, stone tears. When Chandi was 15, she woke one morning feeling like there was something stuck in her eye. To her surprise, when she went to go and look in the mirror, there was a small stone in her eye, appearing to be coming from her tear duct. Ever since that day in July of 2021, Chadni and her family say that the young girl has cried stones out of her eyes several times a day, every day, and no one has any clue why, or frankly how this could be happening. Allegedly, in just the 2 months since the ordeal began, Chadni collected nearly 70 stones that had fallen out of her eyes. The family lives in a small rural village in India, and they don't have much money to send her to specialists, but have posted videos online to try and get help for their daughter. According to the doctors that weigh in, there is no known existing condition that could be associated with this, so it's definitely disturbing, especially considering that from what anyone can tell, nothing seems to be out of the ordinary in her actual eyes. Now, truth be told, there are some doctors out there who think it could be a hoax, but nothing has been confirmed, and honestly, no one really knows what is going on. Next up at number 8, the Iceman. You know how there are people out there who like to do a morning cold plunge? Well, one man, Wim Hof, nicknamed the Iceman, seems to have taken that to a whole new level. Born in the Netherlands in 1959, Hof is, as it seems, immune to freezing temperatures. At the age of 17, Hof said he had a sudden impulse to strip down and jump into a half-frozen canal, and it's not that he felt nothing, but he was able to withstand it for far longer than should have made any sense. This turned him into developing what he calls the Wim Hof method, which he says combines frequent exposure to cold paired with special breathing techniques along with yoga and meditation. In fact, Hof set the Guinness World Record for prolonged full body contact with ice and for swimming under ice in 2000. Then in 2012, curious about if it really was all some breathing technique or if he was some kind of medical marvel, researchers in the Netherlands examined samples of Hof's blood and determined that he was somehow able to manipulate his immune system at will, essentially stopping his body from going into a stress response due to the temperature. Now, sure, does his deep breathing help regulate the body? Of course, but Hof would have you believe it's all in the technique. However, there have been several tragic deaths from people attempting his method and subsequently freezing themselves to death, so maybe there is a little more to the story. Coming in at number 7, a human chimera. Due to the nature of how lives are brought into this world, if there's one thing that is never up for debate, it's generally the biological mother of a person. However, one woman named Karen Keegan found herself in the most bizarre and baffling situation. In 2002, Karen was in need of a second kidney transplant after her first one failed, so she underwent genetic testing with her family to see if any of them would be a match and able to donate her. So imagine Karen and her doctor's surprise when the test suggested that genetically, while all her children were siblings, she was not the biological mother of 2 of the 3 children she brought into the world. Her doctor assumed this had to be a mistake, and so they tested once more, but strangely, the results were the same. As it turns out, Karen was a chimera, which is a person composed of 2 genetically distinct cellular lines. Essentially, it turns out that the DNA in her blood was different from the DNA in her ovaries, a phenomenon that her doctor hypothesized came from 2 eggs that were fertilized very early on and fused together when Karen was a fetus in her own mother. Okay, so maybe this one isn't a totally unsolved medical mystery, but you have to admit it's pretty wild. Next up at number 6, foreign accent syndrome. Imagine waking up one morning and suddenly talking in a completely different accent than you have your entire life. While some people might think that you're doing a bit, believe it or not, there is an actual mystery called foreign accent syndrome, or FAS, where the very thing can happen. Most famously was the case in 1941 when a Norwegian woman suffered a traumatic brain injury during an air raid and suddenly and uncontrollably began speaking with a strong German accent. But others include an American woman who suddenly spoke in a mixture of Australian, Irish, and British after a car accident, as well as an Australian woman who suddenly spoke with a French accent after going to sleep with a headache. For a while, it was regarded as a psychological disorder, however, it is now associated as more of a neurological one, usually onset by head trauma or a stroke. But the part that scientists have not been able to wrap their brains around is how on earth people can seemingly speak in an accent they have never been exposed to. When learning to speak, your natural accent is a result of sound patterns you unconsciously learn, otherwise known as the phonetic system. When you are young, accents can shift as you become exposed to new speech patterns, but by the time you reach your teen years, your phonetic system is pretty much locked in. But FAS somehow affects the entire patterning of your phonetic system and continues to perplex doctors all over the world. Next up at number 5, no appetite. Sometimes when you're feeling under the weather or on a certain medication, it's not uncommon to find that your appetite has gone down. However, anyone who has ever met a teenager can attest that of all the people, they are usually the last to lose their appetite. But back in 2013, a 12-year-old named Landon Jones from Iowa baffled doctors after he suddenly woke up one morning feeling faint and with a horrible cough. His parents wasted no time immediately rushing him to the hospital, where it was discovered he had an infection in his left lung, and while the infection was promptly treated, the worst of it was yet to come. For whatever reason, ever since that day, Landon has never had any kind of appetite or thirst. The boy rapidly started losing weight, going from 104 pounds to just 68 right before his parents' eyes, all seemingly due to the fact that he never felt a hunger or thirst cue. As he continued losing weight, his parents were growing more and more worried about their son's strange condition. But no matter what doctor they took him to, they could never get an answer as to what was happening to him. Landon was given countless brain scans, psych evals, medical evals, and tested to make sure he didn't have an eating disorder, but nothing was providing them with an answer. Some doctors have wondered if he suffers from a brain dysfunction in the hypothalamus, the part that controls hunger and thirst, but his case remains unsolved. Next up at number 4, Syndrome X. When Brooke Greenberg was born in 1993, she weighed a mere 4 pounds and had a hip dislocation. Luckily, the hip issue was fixed through a surgery, and although 4 pounds is generally revered as small for a newborn, she was premature and nothing else seemed off, so from what doctors could see, she appeared to be perfectly healthy. However, things started becoming mysterious around the time she was 4 or 5 years old, as her parents and doctors noticed that Brooke appeared to have stopped growing. As the years went by, Brooke remained virtually unaided, a phenomenon that confused every single medical professional that her family seeked out. By the age of 20, she still looked the same as she had when she was 4 years old, measuring less than 3 feet tall and weighing only about 16 pounds. And it wasn't only her appearance that had stopped progressing. Brooke communicated as an infant would, giggling when happy, crying when sad, and continued to wear diapers. Interestingly, the only thing that continued to grow as normal were Brooke's hair and nails. The family took her to endless specialists over the years looking for answers to their daughter's condition, but each one was just as perplexed as the next. Some simply said not to worry and that she would catch up, while others prescribed growth hormones, but nothing ever seemed to help their daughter grow. Doctors were completely stumped by this poor girl's condition, calling it Syndrome X, and ever since her death at the age of 20 in 2013, specialists have yet to come up with an explanation. Coming in at number 3, eyes shut. When Natalie Adler was 17, she awoke one morning to find that her eyelids were mysteriously swollen. While this was definitely alarming to Natalie, she didn't initially think much of it. Maybe it was allergies or something along those lines. However, next thing she knew, the condition was only getting worse. Her eyes started to become so swollen that she eventually wasn't able to open them up at all. Even stranger was that it began developing into an inexplicable cycle where they would spasm shut for 3 days, and then they would open for 3 days, and it did that for 13 years. By the time she was 30, doctors were still at a loss for what was causing her rare condition. A condition that is so rare, in fact, that it doesn't even have a name. And even after hundreds of tests, they are no closer to understanding her condition. Over the years, Natalie has undergone several surgeries, none of which have proved successful, however said that she does get Botox injections to help keep her eyes partially open, although she continues to suffer from random bouts of blindness each month. Although doctors have yet to come any closer on how to cure her condition, she continues to see eye specialists, hoping that one day her medical mystery will be solved. Coming in at number 2, twins. There are lots of different kinds of perplexing conditions that have popped up in the medical world over the years, but one of the wildest has to be the story of Sanju Bhagat. Most of his life, Sanju had been incredibly self-conscious about his large stomach, which he described as once being so big he appeared to be 9 months pregnant. What's even more shocking is that for whatever reason, he never received any kind of medical attention for his protruding belly. That was until one day in 1999 when Sanju began to experience shortness of breath and was rushed to the hospital. When he got there, the doctors assumed Sanju had a large tumor in his abdomen and rushed him into the operating room to remove it. However, instead of an enormous tumor they expected, they could not believe their eyes when they opened him up and found the remains of a half-formed twin that had been living inside of him the last 36 years. The condition, called fetus in fetu, is incredibly rare, having only been documented 90 times in medical literature throughout history. As it turns out, when Sanju had been in the womb, his twin had become trapped inside and essentially became a parasite. Most that suffer this condition do not live long, often not even surviving inside their own mother, so doctors were completely flabbergasted and unable to explain how this man had lived 36 years with the twin inside of him. And last up today in our number 1 spot, no pain. While most of the time we try to avoid it since you know it hurts and it isn't fun, knowing that you are in pain is actually really important because it helps you keep from getting more hurt. Like when you burn your arm on the 400-degree oven rack and it hurts like hell, so you immediately move your arm away. Or maybe you break your ankle and it obviously hurts, so you stop walking, thus hopefully stopping you from making it even worse. So with that in mind, imagine a life where nothing was telling you you were in pain. Well, that's exactly what Gabby Gingras has had to deal with her whole life. Now 23, Gabby has never felt a semblance of pain her whole life. As a little one, her parents said she would chew her hands until they looked like raw meat, but would never cry, and it was then that they knew something was not right. Then a few years later, Gabby scratched herself blind in one eye and had to wear goggles to sleep until she was old enough to understand her condition. As a kid, she routinely, unwittingly injured herself, once knocking out all of her teeth, another time getting second-degree burns from standing too close to a radiator, and even broke her own jaw but had no idea for several weeks. Even seemingly small things like weather conditions don't faze her. She has to be reminded to wear a coat in the winter so she doesn't get frostbite, or stand in the shade in the summer, as she's completely unaware of how to gauge temperature. Her condition is called hereditary sensory autonomic neuropathy, or HSAN, and while there is no cure, and the cause of the condition remains a big question mark to medical professionals, with proper support and learning from an intellectual perspective what can be dangerous, most people can thankfully live a totally normal life.
Starting us off at number 10 is the Devil's Bible, also known as the Codex Gigas. Back in the 13th century, there was a monk who was sentenced to be walled up alive because he broke his sacred vows. Obviously, this guy wasn't a fan of dying, so what did he do? He promised the monastery that if they let him live, he would write a book that would contain all human knowledge in a day. Yikes, that might be worse than death. In order to fulfill his promise, he sold his soul to the devil himself. Supposedly, this Devil's Bible contained a complete Latin translation of the Bible and multiple other texts, such as medical formulas and even instructions for performing exorcisms. This book was created using more than 160 animal skins and apparently takes 2 people just to lift it. Although, mysteriously, this book became a bit lighter because 12 pages are actually missing. Rumor has it, these pages contain satanic rituals to summon the devil himself. Of course, there is no way in knowing unless we read it for ourselves, so if any of you hardcore readers out there get a chance to take a peek, let me know in the comments. Coming in at number 9 is the Nazca Lines. Most of us have heard of crop circles before, but what about the Nazca Lines? The Nazca Lines, just like crop circles, are actually named geoglyphs. Now, what is a geoglyph? A geoglyph is a large design produced on the ground and usually formed by clastic rocks, stones, stone fragments, and gravel or earth. The Nazca Lines were first discovered in the 1930s when pilots were flying over the Nazca Desert in southern Peru and came across these massive drawings. The ancient Nazca civilization made up these drawings consisting of animals, humans, and plants around 2,000 years ago. There are said to be over 100 of these drawings spanning a total of 50 square kilometers. And while many can identify who and what created these massive drawings, no one alive actually knows the reason behind them. Scholars theorize that these were massive signs to give incoming sailors directions, or that they were a way to communicate with those above us. Dun dun dun! Here at number 8 we have the Roman dodecahedrons. All over the world for hundreds of years, random stone and bronze objects have been popping up in fields and sometimes even in people's yards. These objects are called the Roman dodecahedrons. These objects have 12 sides with a small circle on each and pegs sticking out of every single corner. Experts have dated these objects all the way back to the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE, but once again, they have no idea of their purpose. Many believe these objects resemble an ancient nautical devices, or were used to sow winter grains or even calibrate water pipes for Roman architects. In the end, all of these are just theories and cannot be told for sure. So maybe go and invest in a metal detector and see what you can find. At number 7, we have the King List. Dating all the way back to the 3rd millennium BCE, this giant slab known as the King List lists all of the Sumerian kings with their respective dynasties, locations, and the times they were in power. This may not seem like much of a mystery to you, but the mystery isn't the list of the Sumerian kings on the slab, but what is actually included in the list of kings. There are mythological events inscribed on the slab, as well as the events of the Great Flood and the tales of Gilgamesh, meaning that the stories from the Old Testament could indeed be true and that the kings included on the list were actually gods or demigods. Hopefully all that power didn't go to their heads. At number 6, we have the Antikythera mechanism. Back in 1900, a group of sponge divers discovered a shipwreck in the Mediterranean dating all the way back to 70 to 60 BCE. These divers salvaged 3 pieces of bronze making up what is now known as the Antikythera mechanism. This shoebox-sized artifact stunned scholars for over a century due to the fact that the object's gears and internal mechanisms were far beyond any of the known Greek tech of the time. Some even believe that this object is proof of ancient aliens' visitations to Earth. Although in the late 20th century, X-rays showed that the object is designed to track astronomical movements and was confirmed later by CT scans that revealed inscriptions for what was basically an ancient computer. While the object's use has now been confirmed, what is still puzzling is the advanced construction and precision of this tool that is believed to be way more advanced than what was available at the time. I don't know. If you ask me, I say aliens. At number 5, we have the stone spheres of Costa Rica. Ever since the 1940s, scientists have been digging up these ancient mysterious spheres in the Dicus Delta of Costa Rica. Originally discovered by agricultural forays by the United Fruit Company, small stone spheres ranging from a few centimeters wide to 2 meters in diameter and weighing over 16 tons have been popping up everywhere in the Dicus Delta. Every single one of these spheres is man-made and made up of an igneous stone known as granodiorite. Many of these stone spheres have been moved to high-profile locations throughout Costa Rica, and some are even now privately owned. Everyone seems to love them for their decoration, but the coolest thing about them is that absolutely no one knows why, how, or who made these strange objects. Seems to be a common theme, huh? At number 4, we have the bog bodies of Northern Europe. Ever since the 18th century, hundreds and hundreds of well-preserved human bodies have been discovered in the peat bogs of Northern Europe. Some of these bodies have been dated all the way back to 8000 BCE. Some of you may be familiar with the famous Toland Man, who was discovered back in 1950 by 2 Danish farmers in a small town in Denmark. The Toland Man is believed to be from the pre-Roman Iron Age of the 3rd century BCE. His body was so well preserved that scientists were able to look at the contents of his stomach to determine where he lived. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dewey, this sounds amazingly gross and cool, but where's the mystery, my dude? Well, I'm glad you asked. All of the bodies that have been found have no explanation as to why they were placed in the bogs, nor why this way of disposal would be utilized. There are only speculations that these people were either sacrifices or social outcasts who were fated to meet their doom. Wow. And I thought high school kids were mean. Coming in at number 3 is the underwater ruins of Japan. Just under the surface off the coast of Yonaguni-jima is Japan's very own Atlantis. First discovered back in 1995, divers and researchers believed the findings to be nothing more than just a series of weird rock formations that included straight lines and right angles. Later, there were researchers that discovered a large stone gateway, carved stairways, and streets to huge vaulting towers. Many believe the underwater mystery to be the fallen city of the Jomon people. Experts believe that the city didn't fall into the sea like other fabled underwater cities, but actually slowly submerged over thousands of years. It is believed that this site could hold secrets and answers to all of the other theorized underwater cities around the world, such as Atlantis. Now, we could continue to theorize, or we could just believe that Aquaman starring Jason Momoa is actually a documentary and he currently does live in the ocean. I could see it. At number 2, we have the Piri Reis map. In 1929, this old map was found in the Sultan's palace in Istanbul, Turkey. A legendary commander of the Ottoman fleet by the name of Piri Reis, who lived from 1465 to 1553, is the author of the map. Reis's map is extremely precise. So precise that it actually includes the continent of Antarctica. But wait, hold the phone. Antarctica wasn't discovered until 1773 by British Captain James Cook. But yet, here is Piri Reis's map showing Antarctica back in 1513. Was Antarctica actually just discovered much earlier than originally thought? Or did James Cook just take credit for someone else's hard work? We might never know. Finally, coming in at number 1 is the infamous Big Daddy Stonehenge. In case you've been living under a prehistoric rock for the last few thousand years, you've probably heard of Stonehenge. Stonehenge is a giant prehistoric monument that is located in England and dates back to 3000 BC. The monument consists of a ring of standing stones all weighing around 25 ton, originally from a quarry located 25 kilometers or 15.53 miles away from the current monument. Not one person knows how these ancient people could have moved these massive stones without the use of a wheel or pulley, or why they were even formed in the first place. Is it an ancient observatory? Healing place? Did ancient aliens create it as a landing pad? We may never actually know.
Coming in at number 10, we have what is dark matter? There are several mysteries that the universe has brought us, like how did the universe start? What is at the center of the universe? And how is every dog a good boy? Another one on that list is what on earth is dark matter? Here's the thing, we can't even see dark matter. We just kind of know it's there. How does that work? Well, we see it interact with other things even though we can't see it. Now, how does that work? Well, I have no idea, and we're getting a little too deep into the science for me. But what I do know is that dark matter is supposed to make up more than 85% of all matter in the universe. Well, since there's so much of this stuff floating around in the universe, why is it so hard to find? This is like trying to find a good movie in the DC entertainment universe. Well, Shazam was pretty good. But back to my point. The reason that dark matter is hard to detect is because it doesn't interact with the electromagnetic field, or at least that's what people assume. Coming in at at number 9 we have Kryptos. So I will admit there is one person who can solve this mystery, but if they did, it would kinda take the fun out of it. Kryptos is one of the most famous codes in the world. It's a massive art piece that was created back in 1988 by artist Jim Sanborn. It looks like a giant scroll, and on it are 4 sections that have massive cryptograph puzzles on them. 3 out of the 4 riddles have been solved, but the 4th has yet to be cracked. There have been a few hints given by Jim himself. He said that the answer from the other 3 passages have clues as to what the answer is for the 4th. Also, he has revealed some of the words as Berlin, clock, and northeast, and still, people haven't been able to get to the bottom of what this thing means. I mean, come on guys, the dude's giving you full words. I'm sure he'll lay it all out before he dies or has the answer written down somewhere in case he passes in an accident, but unless he tells the world or some genius is able to break it down, we may never know what it means. Coming in at number 8 we have Who is Anonymous, a group of global hackers who unveil some of the dirty secrets that are going on behind the scenes. Who are they? Well, we will probably never know. For those of you who don't know, Anonymous popped up back in 2003, and at first it was mostly just them trolling the Church of Scientology. But since then, Anonymous has become one of the most powerful social movements. Whenever there's a serious political event, you can bet that Anonymous will show up to leak some pretty serious information. They have been widespread supporters of WikiLeaks, and most recently they were seen during the George Floyd protests. It's hard to tell which claims of Anonymous are real, since anyone with a V for Vendetta mask could claim to be them, but I wouldn't want to be on their bad side because it would seem there is no database that they can't get it into. They have leaked information connected to the police, military services, and even the former President Donald Trump. Coming in at number 7 we have Deciphering the Voynich Manuscripts. If you haven't heard of the Voynich Manuscripts, well, let me take you down a creepy rabbit hole that will leave you scratching your head and probably a little afraid to fall asleep. The exact date that the manuscript was written is unknown, but it's thought that it would have been created somewhere in the 15th century based on the type of paper it was written on. The origin is also unknown because it was written in a language that has never been seen before, but it's thought that this thing could have come from Italy. But the language or code that is used as text in this manuscript has never been deciphered, even though historians have been trying to figure out what's going on with this book since the 90s. There are illustrations of flora in the book, so it's thought that it could be some record of alchemy or potions. And of course, because it's written in an unknown language, people think it could be the work of the devil. In the end, the whole thing could just be a joke or a bunch of gibberish that some madman wrote down in his spare time. People could be working tirelessly to crack a code that means nothing, or it could be the greatest work of dark magic on the planet. I wouldn't worry about it though, because we're probably going to be long gone before someone ever figures this out. Coming in at number 6 we have the Step Geoglyphs. History has left us with so many mysteries that it's hard to keep up with them all. Whether we're talking pyramids, Mayan temples, or is Atlantis a real place? All of these things have us questioning reality. Well, throw the Step Geoglyphs on the list because they are a head scratcher. They were discovered back in 2007 by researchers who were trying to find some sort of ancient pyramid system in Kazakhstan, and what they found was just as bizarre. Markings left on the earth that span for hundreds of miles and come in all sorts of strange shapes. Some of them are large arcing lines and others look kind of like symbols that we would recognize today. The oldest of them was over 8,000 years old. The answer as to why they are there or which group of people made them is still a mystery. It's thought that some of the markings could have been left to track the sun and the stars, as many other civilizations have done similar things, but there still isn't enough information to confirm that, so we're going to jump straight to the most logical answer, which is aliens did it. That's the one that everyone likes to use to explain anything old and weird. Coming in at number 5 we have the Lost City of Atlantis. Was this a real place? Was it the most technologically advanced place in the world? Does Aquaman live there and rule with an iron claw? There are some people who swear that Atlantis is a real place that succumbed to some sort of natural disaster and might hold the greatest treasure on the planet. There are other people who think that it's all just made up, and then there's a third group of people who just want to hang out with mermaids. Coming in number 4, we have How Did They Ruin Game of Thrones? Just a warning, there is definitely going to be some spoilers in this point, so if you don't want to see it, skip to number 3. Okay, here's a fun one, but how on earth did the most popular show on TV, a show that had people clamoring all over it, and was the cornerstone of our culture, just fizzle out into nothing like it almost never existed? Now there are some ideas as to how this could have happened. There are rumors that the directors rushed the final season, that HBO told them that they could take as much time as they wanted, but they got an offer from Disney to work on Star Wars, so they sped through the final season so they can move on to something bigger. Later, the final season of Game of Thrones was so disastrous that they lost the Disney deal. There were just so many unanswered questions. Why did Arya never use her superpowers? How did a dragon get killed so easily? Why did Euron Greyjoy always pop up in the right place at the right time? Why does Jon Snow never fight one-on-one with the Night King? What was Bran doing in the whole final showdown fight? Right now, we have no explanation for any of this. Coming in at number 3, we have the Copper Scroll treasure. A lost treasure is always a great way to get people interested in a mystery. You're telling me there's an untold amount of money somewhere, and it could be all mine with a little bit of luck and a lot of digging? Well, kind of. The treasure of the Copper Scroll was first revealed back in the year 1952. It was part of a great archaeological find in a series of caves next to the Dead Sea. The Copper Scroll is literally a massive piece of copper that is writing engraved into it. Man, to think there was a time when copper was less valuable than paper, so you'd write down all your information in a giant piece of metal. The Copper Scroll talks about a treasure of gold and silver so large that most people think it's a lie. The size of the treasure would maybe be the largest gold and silver reserve in the world. Now, there is some backing to this. At the time that this scroll was written, there was a Roman force that was controlling the area. The people didn't like this, and they were waging war against the Romans. Now, because of this, there could have been several wealthy people who didn't want their goods to fall into the wrong hands and decided that they would pool their resources to keep their moolah in the same place and safe. But the question still stands. If the treasure is real, where is it? Coming in at number 2, we have the ghost boats of Japan. Now this sounds like some sort of urban legend, but I will tell you that this is a very real thing, and it's one of the creepiest stories I've heard in recent years. The ghost boats of Japan have been washing up on the shores of northeastern Japan, and no one knows who sent them. They have all been wooden ships with no one on them. Well, no one alive has been on them. Every boat that makes contact with the shore has bodies in it. Sometimes it's just body parts, like a series of skulls were found on one boat. Other times it's a few bodies laid on top of each other, and the numbers vary every year. One year, 80 bodies were found in mysterious wooden boats that washed up on Japanese shores. Now, even though the exact breakdown on why this is happening is still a mystery, there have been some clues that have popped up along the way. One of the biggest is that there was some Korean writing on board of one of the ships and a torn piece of the North Korean flag. So it would be a good guess that North Korea is doing this. Why they would be sending ghost boats with dead bodies in them out into the water? Well, we still can't answer that. And coming at the number 1 spot, we have Is Jesus Real? For the amount of people who pray to this dude and call him the Son of God, there is zero evidence that he actually walked the earth. Obviously, there's a lot of people who think that he did, but there's also a lot of people who think the Browns are going to win the Super Bowl every year. There are several things about Jesus being real that have been disproven. There were people trying to say that they discovered the house that Jesus grew up in, but carbon dating disproved that, as the time frames didn't add up. The house was constructed way after Jesus' time. There are a lot of people that think the teachings of Jesus aren't from a real person, but were put down on paper as a way to guide people to be kind to one another. Similar to the way that tales from pretty much every other culture in the world were not real, but are highlighted as a lesson. There's also a very interesting documentary about a man who was researching all of the scriptures about Jesus, and he thinks that the symbol for Jesus in the Bible was actually a symbol for mushrooms, like magic mushrooms, saying that taking mushrooms was the key to enlightenment and a religious experience. That I can get behind.
Coming in at number 10, we have what was before the Big Bang. The common consensus is that there was a massive event at the beginning of time that brought all of the universe into existence, and a bunch of stuff happened and then humans showed up. I hope you realize that I'm fast tracking this whole story a little bit. But some of the brightest minds on the planet have been able to use their collective intelligence to pull back the data to the point where the universe erupted from a condensed little sliver of explosion and fired out billions of galaxies galaxies across the ever-expanding universe, but everything that we understand about physics doesn't give us any information about what was before. Many scientists have uttered the words, "It doesn't make sense anymore." Man, that must be frustrating to just not be able to crack the code. My speculation is, and I come at this with zero knowledge of how the universe works, but that before the universe started, there was Samuel Jackson. Because that guy's everywhere. He's done like 200 movies. Coming in at number 9, we have dark matter. If you get into the world of science fiction, then you would have for sure heard of some character using dark matter for something, and it's usually very dangerous for whatever reason. And why is that? Well, here's the thing, scientists still don't know what dark matter is. They have never been able to bottle the stuff and look at it closely, but the universe shows a lot of signs that it does exist. The speculation as to what dark matter is basically a web of particles so plentiful that it holds the universe together. To give you perspective, what we can see in the universe, the stars, the planets, the moons, all of that only takes up about 5% of the endless void. Now, dark matter is thought to take up 25% of the space. There's speculation that dark matter has a gravitational pull, and that's why people think it props up the universe. Other people think that dark matter is an undiscovered property of gravity. Really, we have no idea what's going on, so when you read a science fiction book and they talk about dark matter, remember that the writer has no idea either. At number 8, we have Why Do We Sleep? Well, because Stone Cold said so. That's a super old reference that probably no one will know, but this has been a question that has baffled scientists for an extremely long time. We know the benefits of sleep. When you sleep, your body repairs itself. Sleep is good for your cognitive function. Sleep helps your brain get in information. I could go on for 20 videos about all the scientific evidence about how important sleep is for your health. In fact, getting better sleep is the easiest and cheapest way to get healthier, but the question still stands. Why? There are other organisms on the planet that never need to sleep, like bullfrogs, who won't fall asleep but they go into a rest state. There's a lot of speculation. Some people think that because our bodies are so much more complex, but they still come from the same genetic soup as a lot of the other things on this planet, our cells can't run something this powerful without taking a break. Other people think that this was some sort of defense mechanism created to wait out predators, but in the end, we still don't have the answers. Coming in at number 7, we have the multiverse theory. Now, I want to start off by saying that this theory is still very unproven. It is all speculation. There are some microwave signals that come from the universe, and some scientists think this is evidence of other universes, but it's not like gravity, where we know it's real, we just don't know why. The multiverse theory is that, very much like the infinite expanding universe, there's also an infinite number of other universes that have all different variations of reality, which is pretty much the backbone of the show Rick and Morty. This could mean that there is a universe where you are the hot chick, so feel good about yourself. Now, even if this theory was true, it wouldn't be easy to go visit these places. Beyond the fact that we would have to build something to open a gate to these worlds, the laws of physics that bind these other universes together could be so different from our own that going to them would literally tear your atoms apart. At number 6, we have why does time flow forward? Well, what is perceived as forward, you feel me? I mean, when I first was reading about this, I thought, well, because it does. It can only move one way. But why is the ultimate question? I think that's why I never became a scientist, because I never think to ask these questions. Newton wrote, all motion may be accelerated or slowed, but the flowing of absolute time is not liable to any change. And it's even in question, how could you measure the flow of time? I mean, time could stop moving right now and then start moving the very next second, and we would never be able to tell the difference because our lives continue no matter what. So maybe this is a question that doesn't need to be asked, but I'm glad that we're asking it because one day I would like to go back in time so I can go to Woodstock. Coming in at number 5, we have how does gravity work? I mean, if you ask a flat earther, they'll tell you that gravity is fake and we're all held down by wind or some nonsense, but thankfully over here at Most Amazing Top 10, we don't use flat earth science. Now, we do know the effects of gravity. It basically pulls things in, and the more mass something has, the stronger its gravitational pull. Like the moon is smaller than the earth, so if you go up there and jump around, you will feel like you should be playing for the NBA. Gravity even has a massive effect on how the planet acts. The moon's gravitational pull will pull in and out the tides, but why? Why does this happen? Coming in at number 4, we have why do magnets exist? Now we do know a lot about magnets. I mean, you can give them to a child and they can easily figure out how the opposite forces of a magnet will connect to one another and the same sides reject each other, like the majority of people I message on dating apps. We know that there are magnetic poles on each side of the planet, and we know that the electromagnetic force is one of the largest forces in the universe. But we are still left scratching our heads when it comes to the terms as to why they are here. Magnetism is one of the great underlying forces of the universe, and unlocking this one could answer a ton of questions about existence itself. Coming in at number 3, we have the placebo effect. The mind is a very powerful thing, and if you ever needed evidence, just look at the countless studies on the placebo effect. One of the craziest studies was one done on arthroscopic knee surgery. This is a common practice in older people with knee problems. A very simple surgery will be performed where 2 incisions are made on each side of the knee, and a doctor goes in and cleans out fluid and cleans up cartilage in the knee. Now, the purpose of this study was to find out what was more effective, the cleaning of the cartilage or the cleaning of the fluid. In order for the study to be successful, there was a control group that was given a mock surgery without their knowledge. Slits were made on the side of the knee, and even a fake surgery was shown on a screen for the patient to watch, but no actual surgery was performed. And the control group recovered just as well, and in some cases better, than the people who had the surgery. So in other words, the mind repaired the body somehow. Now, how this happens, we don't know, but it goes to show how much your thoughts can have influence over your body. Coming in at number 2, we have dark energy. Now it sounds like we're gonna go into a Marvel movie or something. What on earth is dark energy? Well, have you been paying attention to the list so far? We don't know what it is. And when I say we, I mean people much smarter than me. But we speculate that dark energy is what makes up the other 70% of the universe. Now, since the universe is constantly expanding like my gut after I refuse to listen to my own body's signals to stop eating, there needs to be some explanation as to why this is happening. The speculation is that dark energy is the cause of this never-ending growth spurt. Dark energy could be created by quantum particles smashing into each other all over the known universe. This is happening so many times that it would take a good portion of this video just to count all the zeros. But these collisions create energy, which in turn is pushing the universe apart. The question is, how far can the known universe get pushed? Could it get pushed to the point where reality is ripped apart? I don't know, I'm not smart enough to answer this. And coming in for the number 1 spot is quantum entanglement. Now it sounds like I'm just making this stuff up, but I promise you I am not. This is very real. Quantum entanglement is when 2 particles that are nowhere near each other will start to mirror each other. Now why is this strange? Well, because it was long thought that only something within a particle's environment could affect it. On top of this, the only way that particles could be doing this is if they were communicating in some way to one another, like they were hooked up on WhatsApp or something. But here's the thing, these particles are so far apart and moving together so perfectly that the speed in which they would have to be sending information breaks the laws of physics. The information would have to move faster than the speed of light, which was thought to be impossible. Now, how is this happening? Once again, we have no idea, but it begs the question, will we one day be able to move faster than the speed of light? I hope so, because that would be cool. Coming in at number 10, we have ACT. If I were to tell you that the Australian cultural terrorists were a real thing and they pulled off one of the greatest art heists in history, you would think that's probably true because everything on this channel is a strange fact that you were unaware of. Well, if you thought that, then good, because I'm going to tell you about the time that the Australian cultural terrorists stole Pablo Picasso's famous painting, The Weeping Woman. The year was 1986, and the painting was being housed in the National Art Gallery of Victoria. Then one day it was just gone. To this day, no one knows how the painting was stolen, but get this, it took 2 days for them to realize it was gone. Could you imagine owning something worth $1.2 million and having it stolen, and then not cluing in until the weekend was over? Well, all that was left in the painting's place was a note that said ACT. This was the first attack of the Australian cultural terrorists, and soon the Melbourne police station will receive a series of ransom notes that were demanding more funding for the arts in Australia. Wait, what? I've never heard of something so noble and selfish all in one sentence, because you're not stealing an extremely expensive painting for yourself, you're stealing it to improve society. But that's where you start? You want funding for the arts instead of impoverished communities? This heist sounds like it was pulled off by the rich kid whose dad owns the gallery. And to back up my point even further, this heist was pulled off on August 2nd, and by August 19th, an anonymous tip led the police to Spencer Station where the painting was found in a locker. So you pull pulled off a ransom heist and you didn't even have the gall to hold onto the painting for 3 weeks? The Australian government never gave in to their demands. The thieves just got too tired of this ransom business. I guess their love for the arts was just a summer fling. Coming in at number 9, we have the Smith girls. Sometimes you need to take a moment and be thankful for your life. This story is a perfect example of why. For many of us, things could have gone so much worse. This story is about Pepper and Renee Smith. The year was 1973 and their mother was having serious health problems with her current pregnancy. She was a single mom, so she hired a babysitter to take care of her girls, and one day she came back from the hospital and they were gone. She went on a massive search for her girls, but she could never find them. It wasn't until 2011 when a tip sent her in the right direction. She heard about 2 girls who had been stolen by their babysitter at ages 3 and 5. These girls were trafficked across America and held captive until they were teenagers. They were later able to get free and started working odd jobs until they were able to find their birth records and start searching for their mom. Sure enough, these 2 girls were her daughters and the family was reunited. Coming in at number 8, we have what happened to David Lee Miles. One day, David Lee Miles just went missing. His car was missing, so it seemed that he had just got up and left. An investigation was launched, but there was no sign of him anywhere. There was a lot of theories thrown around. Some said he could have been on the run. Other people thought that maybe he was murdered in his car and someone disposed of the vehicle. But the logical answer was that David was 72 years old and had been fighting a losing battle with cancer for a long time. It was thought that he might have taken his own life. And then 9 years later, a tip led police to a lake in Michigan where they found his car with his skeleton resting in it. They were able to identify him by his ID that was left in the passenger seat. Coming in at number 7, we have Grateful Dead. If a body is found and it has been damaged to the point where no one can tell who it is, and there's no ID on the body and no DNA in the system to trace back to the person, then it can be pretty hard to identify that body. Well, that's what happened to someone who was driving back from a Grateful Dead concert in 1995 who died in a car accident. No one could find out who this person was, but police used face reconstruction technology to build his face and post a picture on a website called Web Sleuths. The picture got anonymously posted on Facebook in an attempt to get it out to more people, and eventually his family saw it and sent in DNA samples, and it turns out this was Jason Callahan. His family thought he had run away to start his own life. Coming in at number 6, we have anonymous Twitter help. A brutal hate crime was committed in Philadelphia on 2 gay men that left one of them in the hospital. There was surveillance footage, but no one could find out who these attackers were. The police were looking for answers, and someone on Twitter posted a link to a video. And through some group internet sleuthing, people were able to find a picture of the attackers eating at a restaurant that was extremely close to where the attack took place, and then these people were found and arrested. Coming in at number 5, we have random Reddit help. A very strange post was thrown up on a Reddit forum that asked the Reddit community to help solve a mystery. A person living alone in an apartment kept waking up to find sticky notes all over his room with strange messages on them. He thought someone had been breaking in and leaving them behind while he was sleeping. An anonymous person commented on the post and said there might have been overly high CO levels in the apartment. This can cause sleepwalking and hallucinations. The poster checked the CO levels and it turns out this was the cause. Coming in at number 4, we have Tammy Jo Alexander, a very mysterious case that is only half solved, but maybe talking about it here will help us get one step closer. A body of a girl was found in New York without any clues as to who left it there. No one could find out who this person was, and the reason would be uncovered 36 years later. When some anonymous people on the website Web Sleuths started looking into the case, they found that this was the body of a 16-year-old girl named Tammy Jo Alexander who went missing from Florida. Well, they've got this far now, but now it's time to find out how her body ended up there and who killed her. Coming in at number 3, we have the hitchhiker. I don't really think this happens much anymore, but hitchhikers used to be a very common thing, and most of the time was just people trying to get around, but some of them really wanted people dead. Charles Holden was approached by a man on the street who said he needed a ride to a hospital. He said it was an emergency. Charles was suspicious of the man and didn't want to drive all the way to the hospital because he said he was close home. Eventually, Charles drove him partway, but when he stopped, the man threatened to kill Charles if he didn't drive him all the way. He convinced the man to step out of his car for a moment and then he drove away. But then when Charles returned home, he saw the dude lurking outside of his apartment. He called the cops, but by the time they got there, the man had worked his way into the back of the house, broke in, and murdered his mother. Cops couldn't find this man, and it wasn't until 17 years later when a tip set the cops in the the right direction, and they were able to find the killer, who would later be sentenced to life in prison. Coming in at number 2, we have the Chicago triple murder. Okay, let's jet back to the year 1955. Everything looks old-timey and people wear suits all the time. Also, there was some murder happening. The city was Chicago and the month was October. 3 young boys were found dead, all buried together. This launched one of the biggest manhunts in Chicago history, but there wasn't much to go on. The boys had gone downtown to watch a movie, and on their way home someone had spotted the boys hitchhiking. Never get into a car with a stranger. Well, no one says what vehicle the boys got into, and then the case went cold. And it would stay cold for nearly 40 years. It wasn't until the FBI was investigating another case and they got a tip about the Chicago case that was lost in time. The tip pointed towards Kenneth Hansen, and after a thorough investigation, it was discovered that Hansen did in fact commit this crime, and he was given a sentence of 210 years. He would later die in prison. And for the number 1 spot, we have Raina Marroquin. Sometimes an anonymous tip can come from someone who isn't even alive. For this story, we have to head over to the year 1999 and set our feet down in New York. A new home was purchased, and the previous owner left behind something that probably should have been disposed of quite a while ago. It was a giant oil drum, and inside the oil drum was a dead body that had been in there for 30 years. But here's where the tip comes in. There was an address book in the drum that revealed to investigators that the body belonged to Raina Marroquin. They found out that she had gone missing 30 years ago and was working for a company called Melrose Plastic. The owner of the company was Howard Elkins. This is where the story gets even crazier. When Marroquin's body was found, it was discovered that she was 9 months pregnant. A DNA test was ordered to see if Elkins' DNA matched the baby. Elkins committed suicide before the results came out, but the baby was in fact his.